Well,
Welcome.
welcome.
It's great to have you all here today as you file in. Feel free to jump into the chat and tell us where you're attending from. We love to hear from you. Welcome to Run University. This is going to be a really interesting week, Joyce.
Oh yeah,
After looking at these findings a lot, the findings around music, I think, are some of the most foundational and interesting. So I think this week is going to be really eye-opening.
yeah, definitely.
Big learning opportunity. So as you come in, tell us where you're coming from. Say hi in the chat. Oh, there we go. Good. Hi, Jenny. Um, so these are strange times indeed, I would say. And I think there's no better time than right now to be activating audience research of this kind, research focused on audience development. There are some really important findings in this week's Run University about the music habits and preferences of the general population. We're very good at finding out what the people who already listen to us want and need from us. We develop very good, strong relationships with our current audiences, but this is solid research that helps us appeal to people who would love us if they knew we were there, and if we delivered what they wanted. So I'm glad you're here today. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I'll turn it over to you, Joyce.
Great. And I think the great thing about the run study is so many of the findings about our not yet audience and our current audience are spot on. So the things that you're looking at doing to build audience will also build engagement with your current audience. So, okay, welcome. People are still coming in. Make yourselves comfortable. Thank you for being here. And we'll get started now. I'm Joyce Mack from Greater Public. A few things to note before we roll. Please put your questions in the Q&A box and your comments, anecdotes, and thoughts in the chat box. We should have some time for questions at the end, but we do have a lot to get through today. Closed captions are enabled, and you can adjust your caption settings in the Zoom menu bar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available tomorrow along with the slides for on-demand viewing on greaterpublic.org. So as Abby said, today we're going to go deep into the Run research results to uncover the most relevant findings for public media music organizations. What does it mean to be local? How do we best build and serve communities? And what are music stations already successfully doing to meet audiences where they are? A reminder that next Monday we'll dive into relevant research findings related to news and information. So I am now thrilled to turn it over to Chris, Phil, and Sam from City Square Associates, and to Frank Dominguez of WDAV and Lindsay Kimball of NPR's The Current. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Schiavone from City Square Associates. It's great being with all of you this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. I'm here with my colleagues Phil and Sam. I'll allow them to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Phil Cook, Research Director at City Square.
Hi there, I'm Sam Luz, the Research Manager at City Square. You'll hear from me later to address all of your burning questions at the end of today's webinar.
We're really excited to be joined in this endeavor this afternoon by Lindsay and Frank. And Lindsay and Frank, for the benefit of your colleagues who may not know you yet, could you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, so I'm Lindsay Kimball. I am the program director at The Current. We're a AAA station out of Minnesota Public Radio. I've been there I'm celebrating my 20th year at The Current, but I've also, for any of the membership folks on the call, I've also had time in a membership seat as well at NPR. So I've had a little chance to do programming and learn the revenue side as well.
And I'm Frank Dominguez, WDAV General Manager currently, but been Program Director and Content Director and chief cook and bottle washer in the past. And I've been at the station for 30 years now. So classical music radio has been a big part of my life. And earlier in the 2000s, when PMCC was PRPD and was doing core values research and workshops and that sort of thing, I was very heavily involved in that. And I'm really excited about this Researching Unmet Needs project.
Thanks a lot, Frank, and thank you, Lindsay. Let me just get over here. For the benefit of those of you who have not been following Run University, this gives you a little bit of a feel for where we've been so far and where we're headed. Important to know that the slide decks and recordings from the fundraising session webinar on June the 2nd and the marketing webinar on June the 9th are available to you, along with a bibliography that goes along with the series and some activity sheets and leave behinds that were related to those sessions. And as Joy said, next week we'll be getting together again to talk about the Run findings insofar as they relate to the news and information space. Not featured here on the screen was the very first Run session, Run 101. And if you are new to researching unmet needs, especially if you are new to the interactive dashboard, which we'll be telling you about a little bit later, that allows you to explore the file, also going to be a good resource for you. So as we go through this series, lots of a really nice library of resources being built up that we're hopeful will be useful to all of you for a long, long time. Our focus today, however, is specifically the music vertical. One of the things we've been thinking about and talking a lot about in the Run project is the idea of public radio's role, not simply in developing audiences, but in building communities. So in a way, all of the findings we're talking about here are going to this question of how can music and your service in music be used to build community and serve the communities where you're all located. We plan to go into a fair amount of depth here, but even at this, it's not intended to be comprehensive, and there's more where this came from. So we encourage you to dive even deeper than we go to today. This formidable scene is just a reminder to us as your presenters of something you don't need to be reminded of, namely that hovering in the background of this conversation right now is a really troubling conversation around the future of federal funding. But I do believe, as Abby and Joyce have both said over and over again, that in a way, the findings from Run are even more important than ever, given this as part of the background. And Lindsay's going to have a few things to say about this in a couple of minutes, but I did want to nod in the direction of what's going on in DC, because it is relevant to the work that all of us are trying to do together. As we move through the material today, we're going to be touching on 5 different themes from the Run study that are relevant musically speaking. And you see them listed here on the screen. I'm going to talk about the first 2 topics on the screen, the learning from this research that music is profoundly important culturally, not least of which because it provides an important refuge for people, a source of uplift and a background to people's lives. A really powerful confirmation of the dominance of streaming in the music space, which leaves open the question, well, in a world where just about everyone seems to be streaming their music, what is the role for the institution formerly known as public radio? And we have a few things to say about that. And then Phil's going to walk you through the 3rd, 4th, and 5th themes, talking a little bit about the really robust appetite that we found in the research for in-person, live, local connection, the potential that exists in the public radio world for actually owning the local music scene when the rest of the commercial marketplace seems to have mastered the algorithm. And finally, some really interesting learning about people's genre interests and the opportunity that all of that learning in the genre area represents for public radio. Some really powerful insights there. So that's gives you a little bit of a feeling for where we're headed. So let me start with the first theme, this idea of music as a refuge. You know, in the Run study, we asked people to report the frequency with which they listen to music of any kind and the frequency with which they watch, read, or listen to news and current events of any kind. And while there's really robust news consumption and music consumption, I think you can see at a glance that the frequency of music consumption outstrips the frequency of news consumption. The first clue in the study that music is a really, really important part of people's lives here. There's some interesting evidence here, not necessarily a guarantee, but certainly strong evidence to support the idea that those who are avoiding news, and there are a lot of news avoiding people out there, tend to be regular music listeners instead. And we're going to delve into the reasons for this in a moment. But I just want to be clear about the fact that the music service that public media organizations provide is integral. It's indispensable. It's not a nice to have. It's a cultural need to have for a whole variety of reasons. If any of you have seen some of the preliminary findings from Run, you're already aware of the fact that the Run study confirms something that a lot of us know from other sources, namely that news avoidance is very, very widespread. And so what we see in the music service is the ability for public radio to make a meaningful cultural contribution to people's lives outside the news space when news is really hard to consume. Lindsay, I know you had a couple of thoughts about this overlap or non-overlap between news and music.
Yeah, so in thinking particularly about our advocacy messaging around the rescission vote and the rescission package, this is data that has been top of mind for me in thinking about the people that are listening to music and the people that are coming to the music station who are and sort of what they're thinking about when they are listening to us, and then how we shape our messaging and how that's different than we have a news station, we also have a classical station, but for any music station, you can't just come out of the gate talking directly about this is what's happening. There's a vote about this. You have to give the context and kind of set it up. I think sometimes the news is stressful. We have a lot of data saying that people come to us as a respite to de-stress. So trying to find a way not only to give background and inform people, but also to give them a little bit of hope when they are taking action on something. So, for example, a lot of our advocacy messaging has been giving people the background on what's been going on very briefly in a way that's very like, how would you explain this to someone very quickly, like your elevator speech, not too much, not getting too much into a civics lesson on it because it's easy to go that direction. And then explaining what you need them to do. Like, we want you to reach out to your Congress people and let them know that you care about this service. And together, when we work together, we can make a difference. So you kind of are like ending it on a positive note. Because at the end of the day, hopefully making our voices heard will make a difference here. And so that way it's kind of thinking about what position is that listener in if news stresses them out, also coming to it with a perspective of they're not listening to the news 24/7 and might not know what the word rescission means, because half of us at our station were Googling what rescission meant when we got it too. So it's making sure that you're thinking exactly about who that audience is. Particularly if you're a service that has a news station, you might be getting copy that's, for at least for us, a little bit more newsy, and making sure you're tweaking it so that it really meets your audience where they are.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Lindsay. And on that theme of positivity and uplift, really important to know, and the run findings are really clear about this, that the top reason that people are listening to music when they listen to music is to be uplifted, right? Also, they're looking for great background noise when they're doing other things. They're looking to tune out the rest of the world, but first and foremost, they're looking to be uplifted. I got the impression, Frank, from you when we first talked about this, that it's not the first time that you've heard this.
No, indeed. And as I mentioned when I introduced myself, back in the early 2000s, we were doing in what was then Public Radio Program Directors Association research into the core values of classical music radio. And these findings right now with Run are very similar to the findings we saw about soothing and relaxing, but helps you focus and complements the way you spend your day, and enjoying things in very concise ways, enjoying the breaks in very concise ways, because the music is the appeal of the programming. So to me, seeing this confirmed by that is I think a good approval of the way we've been programming not only WDAV, but I think a majority of classical music stations now are thinking in that way. But it's also, to me, an opportunity to realize that there are other listeners out there who may not consider themselves serious classical music listeners who have the same feeling about music. That's what this survey is telling us. It's not limited to classical music lovers, and everybody else is different. Music lovers love these things, whatever the form of music they love. And I think that there's a marketing opportunity there for classical music stations. Certainly, that's how we're interpreting it at WDAV. And we've just started an ad campaign that's running on the sides of buses and on the light rail that we have in Charlotte, and will soon be on billboards. And what we're emphasizing is not, Beethoven in a party hat or Tchaikovsky with sunglasses on, but instead the soothing, uplifting, relaxing, and regenerative nature of the music that we play and the programming that we provide. And I think this really is telling us that, yes, you've had it right for all these years with your core listeners, but you can also use this to reach out to other listeners and bring them into the fold.
If we had known, Frank, that you were going to mention Beethoven in a party hat, we would have done an AI generated version of the of the same.
It's my
But no,
favorite.
but no, absolutely. And what's cool in the study is that we have a line of sight to how different demographic and psychographic segments, respond. So this business of music being used to be uplifted, especially salient among women and among Gen Xers and Black and African American respondents and economically disadvantaged households. The idea of music as a background being especially salient among those who are most informed about public radio, among boomers, among folks in rural areas, and the idea of music to tune out the world being most relevant among the lower frequency news consumers, which kind of makes sense intuitively, right? If you're avoiding news, you're looking for music to help you tune out the world. Millennials and folks who have limited broadband access. And I mentioned to you before the dashboard, the beauty of the Run dashboard is that it gives the user of it the ability to drill down on some of these segments for some of these data points and really see how they live distinctly in different groups. Part of the Run project design involved qualitative research as well as quantitative research. We did a series of focus groups designed in part to understand in greater depth what we had uncovered in the quantitative data. And these conversations that we had with folks online across the country were really, really illuminating. And you're getting a flavor here in some of the quotes about how these sentiments live. This woman, Madeline, who talked about, music as a soundtrack in her life. This woman, Caroline, a local station listener, who talks about using music to tune everyone else out. And this guy, Ken, who's an anxious flyer and is using music to change his state of mind. So listen, I think the point we're making here is that music is really an important and critical part of people's lives. The study involved not only measuring people's need for certain types and kinds of content and gratifications to be met, but also the extent to which they see public radio or public media as a go-to for getting these things met. And what's interesting here to see is if you pay attention to the dots that are sitting in the green portion of the chart to the right of your screen, what you see is that public radio is a plausible go-to for this idea of music as a source of uplift, or music as a soundtrack for one's life. Interesting to note, the third line down, the idea of using public radio to tune out the rest of the world, not so much. And I think this is of a piece with what we know about people's views of public radio generally. While the very, very important journalistic service that public radio provides in the news and information space is invaluable, the fact of the matter is that can, for some people, be like a steady drumbeat of negativity. So it may take a little more work. It sounds like the work you're doing, Frank, to remind them that their local public radio station is out there to do this other thing for them as well. The second thing we want to talk a little bit is about the dominance of streaming in the music space. I'm sure that this is not coming as a news flash to any of you, but I think Team CSA very much wants to put an exclamation mark after and underline this finding, because it sheds light on the present, but also I think points the way to the future. We asked folks in the study how they prefer to listen to music or music-related content. And I think you see overwhelmingly the Spotify's, Apple Musics, and Amazon Musics of the world dominate the space, with 2/3 of the national sample telling us that that's their preferred way of getting their music, followed by YouTube videos, followed by radio. So radio is not nowhere. It's in that upper tier, but the extent to which the big music streaming platforms and YouTube are dominating the music space is really, really striking. Now, when you look at the same data from a generational perspective, you see the future. Like, this is the crystal ball into the future as you watch the percentage of those from right to left who prefer radio as their source of music tick down from 64% for baby boomers to 58% for Gen Xers to 47% for millennials and 29% for Gen Z. Lindsay, I know you have a couple of thoughts about this generational view of platform usage.
Yeah, I think one of the takeaways here is, at the end of the day, folks do want to listen to good music, and we all have really great products. And that means it's really important to make sure that our stations are streaming where our audiences are. So making sure that we have access, maybe it's a stream you have that's on YouTube and it's a place for them to discover your stream on YouTube, or you have other videos on YouTube that redirect to your stream. But having a really solid app with a good listening experience and a good smart speaker experience, so that you are going to your audience rather than trying to find ways to get them to come to your broadcast signal all the time, is a strategy I think we'll need to employ in order to continue to reach younger listeners who if you ask them if they have a radio, they don't think about what's in their car necessarily, or think about what a radio is. And so they're thinking about the phone that's in their hand, and other platforms that they're using. So being creative about how we use those and how we reach people on those platforms, and then reward them for using us on those platforms so that we can develop loyalty, and then bring them to us and eventually have them on our platforms like your app and streams and that kind of thing. So stuff that we do in particular is, I have in our legal ID message at the top of the hour, we mention the app and the smart speaker in every message. So it's like hammered in constantly, for example. And then the key thing there is partnering with marketing and making sure you're top of mind once you get past awareness and get people into usage, and try to keep your station top of mind so that they are using you on the platform that they want and developing that loyalty.
Thanks, Lindsay. As many of you are aware, the Run survey was fielded not only with this national sample of 10,000, but also in 19 different markets with oversamples. And one of the places we oversampled was the great state of Wisconsin. And there, Wisconsin Public Radio asked us to include a question to get a little more texture around what it means to listen to the to live radio, right? So we gave them, respondents a set of possible ways in which one could be listening to live radio, and asked them to indicate which of these methods they used most often. What's interesting to us in this, none of us are really surprised to see that nearly 60% of the general population in Wisconsin say that when they're listening to live radio, it's, on a radio in their car or truck. But if you total up and then deduplicate all of the different live streamed methods of listening to linear radio on this bar chart, what you see is just over a third of the general population say that they're listening via a live stream in at least one of these four ways. Now, we've had some conversations with folks who look closely at their live stream numbers and compare them against their Nielsen audio numbers and feel this might be a little bit of an exaggeration. People do tend to over-report when they do self-reports in surveys. Be that as it may, this is a not insignificant portion of the population who tell us they're using live streams to get linear radio. So, I think, one of the takeaways there is not to estimate the value and the potential value of that. Lindsay was talking a little bit about owned platforms. That's one of the platforms you own, and you can definitely continue to drive traffic there. Again, more insights from the qualitative research. Young Cyril, who tells us a little bit about how he's used Apple Music and how grateful he is for the fact that the algorithm has tuned its taste to what he finds good. So helps you to understand a little bit about why people would like the algorithm. Isabel tells a really interesting story about, the different ways she's getting her music, from top 40 radio stations to a YouTube playlist to asking Alexa. And again, I think, this qualitatively confirms the point, Lindsay, that you were making, the necessity of being there in all the ways that people have of finding music. I mean, if music is a soundtrack to people's lives, then it needs to be omni-available, right? And different devices and different technologies work best in different places. Frank was nice enough to let us share this little bit of data from the WDAV version of the study, where Frank asked us to present people with a list of different sources or platforms for listening to music, including their very own WDAV, Classical Public Radio, just to see where aided mentions of WDAV Classical Radio fit alongside of all these other ways of getting music. Here again, really powerful confirmation of the importance of YouTube as a music listening platform. We've all been very accustomed to thinking of YouTube as a dominant video platform, but to be thinking of it more and more as a music platform, really powerful. Also, I think a fairly impressive showing for WDAV. More than 1 in 10 of the general public saying that they've used WDAV for classical, and then you can see those groups where WDAV tends to do even better. Frank, I know you had a few thoughts about this, since this is your very own market.
Yeah, I was pleased to be ahead of Apple Music Classical, obviously, and the Idagio streaming app. Is that how you say it? I'm not that familiar with it, but I know of it. And it was nice to be ahead of our fellow classical music station in North Carolina, WCPE, though I wish them well, of course. What kind of perplexed me is having WFAE 90.7 FM, of which I am an alum. I started my career there, and I couldn't figure out why they would have more music listening than we did, even if it's just 1%. But I think the answer there is sort of a lesson for all of us and a key for all of us, because at the time, WDAV was doing a music podcast called Amplify, which was really keyed in to the local Charlotte scene. It was all about introducing new artists, new bands, new singer-songwriters, new genres. And it was a hit. It was something that people really gravitated to. So I think that's why FAE scored a 15% there in terms of music. And then the other big takeaway for me is the YouTube. I remember being involved in a focus group, which I presented for at PRPD back in the day, where we heard people saying in the WDAV focus group, well, when wouldn't you listen to WDAV? And I remember one of the respondents say, well, one day I was just in the mood to hear Tchaikovsky, and WDAV hadn't played any, so I went to YouTube and I loaded up all the Tchaikovsky videos I could find and spent the day listening to it. And that was a good 10 years ago. And now it's indisputable that that's where people are turning to for the music they love, and in a different format than we ever envisioned. So I think it's incumbent on all of us who are music radio presenters, whether it's classical or otherwise, to think of YouTube as a platform that we have to be on and that we have to be thinking about creatively and understand how it works.
Yeah. Frank, you don't know how many times I've repeated that anecdote. If you were charging me for repeats, you'd be very wealthy right now. I love that YouTube anecdote.
That's why we got Frank here.
Yeah. All right. So, given the fact that radio is competing for ears in this marketplace dominated by streaming platforms, we wanted to look for something in the findings that would point to a sustainable path forward. So, it was clear to us in the survey and the focus groups that in-person community music events is something that people are looking for more of, and that you are seen as someone who can deliver this. Here's another output from the unmet needs line of questioning in the survey, specifically focused on different music experiences. You see this includes a wide range of audio formats and video content, but also specific kinds of in-person experiences. And those are the options that ended up ranking highest as things people enjoy and say there's not enough of. You see, it's live concerts, music festivals, and event calendars for finding the concerts and shows happening in their area. When we layer on that third line of questioning around whether or not these are things public radio would be good at providing, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So live concerts are kind of in this middle tier, I think, reflecting the extent to which maybe some people in their markets have local stations already hosting concerts, or maybe they only think of public radio on the news side of content. But it's interesting that event calendars pop here as something presumably already in public radio's wheelhouse. So there is this clearly expressed need for event calendars, and it's something many people already expect from you as a community-based organization. Building on that, here's one of the concepts we presented in the focus groups, which was this very bare bones idea for a local music calendar, but we tweaked it a bit to have a focus on events hosted by community organizations like local public radio. The responses were mostly positive. A lot of the comments focused on its value for this idea of community cultivation, which you can see in the third quote there, maybe getting them out of their pop culture bubble, and the appeal of it coming from a local radio station as this entity that people feel like would have their thumb on the pulse of the music scene. Broadly speaking, this concept echoed the popularity of things that people want. So they want a centralized, comprehensive, and customizable touch point for seeing what concerts are happening in their area. We know a lot of stations out there have already been experimenting with this kind of thing. And when we took the run studies on the road in a lot of local markets, people were telling us the extent to which they've put this kind of thing out there. Lindsay, do you want to tell us about what the Current has done by way of music calendars?
Yeah, so we started the gig list several years ago, and initially it was sort of like, oh, we do this on air. Is this people can just look this up online? Is this even useful? But what we found was as weekly newspapers were going away. We had one called City Pages that was going away. So was concert listings and access to finding out about events that were happening in town. And there were fewer and fewer outlets for aggregating that information. But also culturally, I think there's been more of an emphasis on finding experiences rather than things. So I think about how around the holidays people want tickets to something or more of an experience rather than, you know, an item under a tree or whatever. So, um as people think about experiences, they want to make sure they're not wasting their time either. So they want to find a list of just not everything under the sun, but they want a list of like, here's some options that are all pretty good. Like if you spend your time doing this, it's not a waste of time. So our attempt was like, let's do that in a format where there's a lot of options, but it's curated so that it's not everything under the sun, but it's a list of stuff where we say we've got kind of like our stamp of approval on it, so to speak. Um, but still making sure we're lifting up those small local gigs. Like if you want to go check out that free show at the corner. So it is a list of mostly concerts that are happening. It could be national or local artists that are happening every day. You can filter by event and by date. And then our hosts will read it. We'll go through what's happening that day and the next day 3 times a day. Plus, they'll do a mini version of it roughly every hour. So this is something where we talk about it on air. It's online. We also share it through social media. So it's got this multi-channel experience, multi-platform experience. And so it's become like one of the go-to resources in the community because that resource has sort of evaporated, and we've just seen that we've kind of become that go-to resource.
We actually heard a lot about that in the focus groups. Like people said that there might be event calendars in their area, but navigating it is a nightmare because there's so much stuff that they really don't care about. Like there's no degree of curation around what the person themselves might want or focus on very specific kinds of events. So people just end up feeling overwhelmed. So that's a little bit of nuance to this unmet need around event calendars.
Yeah, like if you want music tonight, here are your options. Not like here's every play and every sort of museum opening. So yeah, and the list is usually very manageable. And if you don't want to go out, we also have what's on the late night TV shows.
Yes. This is a more local data just to reinforce this point one more time. Confirmation we saw in a local market in Jacksonville. So you see listed here a range of services or offerings that could be made to local residents. And in terms of appeal, what rises to the top? Online calendars for community events and live music. Right alongside the always popular coverage of the local food scene.
We always think that food is sort of the baseline or the benchmark because we know that food is perennially popular as a content vertical. So the fact that calendars are right up there with it, yeah, that's good news. All right, so that's the calendars. When it comes to the need for actual local concerts, this started to make a lot of sense when we read up on the literature of the decline of small and medium-sized music venues across the country. There was an actual study that looked at this specifically in the UK, which we're not citing here, but a lot of the press has focused on how this is being felt across the US, especially after the pandemic. So this is a write-up from a couple years ago that does a good job illustrating the economic forces behind this in terms of how the margins have gotten so tight due to operational costs that it's just become too expensive for a lot of these places to stay open. And here's a write-up from The Guardian from last year, specifically talking about the situation as Portland as a kind of case study. Portland is a city with a really rich and vibrant local music scene, but they're essentially getting squeezed by the commercialization of concerts spearheaded by Live Nation, which is going into cities and kind of repeating this pattern. So the worry here is that with just relatively large capacity venues being the only thing left standing, a lot of small local acts and artists aren't going to have the spaces and platforms they need to perform, and then the residents themselves who want to go to concerts are only going to have as an option, going to Live Nation venues and paying Live Nation ticket prices. Not only were live concerts expressed as an unmet need in the Run study, interesting to see attitudinally which segments of the population felt especially strong about this.
This was an attitude statement from the survey, which just cuts right to the point. And you see 47% of Americans, almost half of the country, saying that they're always on the lookout for live music in their area. And on top of that, we've actually seen pretty consistently how millennials specifically and parents of young kids are even more inclined to agree with this. Here's another concept we tested in the focus groups. Again, it's kind of the bare bones idea, but we focused here on live concerts in their area, with honing in on the value of small, intimate spaces, small, intimate crowds, a casual environment, and the possibility of maybe unusual spaces, sort of riffing on the tiny desk idea. Again, very positive reactions, very positive conversations. People like sort of the cool factor of visiting different parts of their cities, and they talked about it being a great idea for a date night. Once again, Lindsay, I know the Current has had its own event strategy to meet this demand. Tell us what that looks like.
Yeah, so we in the last several years actually shifted our event strategy from one really large concert with a ticket price that just kept going up to multiple concerts over the course of the summer. We started with, I believe, 5, and now we're up to 10 because the demand has been so great. But the idea is they're at a brewery or a cidery several times throughout the summer, and we bring in live music, and they're free, and they're in the afternoon, which makes them accessible. Because one of the things a lot of folks run into is those ticket prices are kind of outrageous. If you want to bring kids, particularly to a show, they're too late, they're too expensive. If you and someone else just want to go to a show, they can be too expensive. So the other thing is, as a music discovery station, we can really lean into our value proposition of being a music discovery outlet and bring an emerging artist to audiences. So folks know I can go see this live. It's low barrier to entry, and I don't have to worry about investing a ton of money if I don't know if I like something enough to invest that amount of money. And as you see here, like parents bring their kids and they have a blast. We have big crowds there, and they play usually like a 30 to 40-minute set, and one of our host DJs, and it's just like a 4 to 7 p.m. thing on a Thursday throughout the summer. We have a chance to engage different underwriters and generate revenue. It's just a different way of generating the same amount of revenue roughly as we did with the larger scale event. It's just spread out over the course of the summer rather than concentrated on one day. And we're actually able, I think, to streamline that work rather than really concentrated over the course of 1 month. So we're not wiping out our team and exhausting our team while still serving our audience and bringing them what they need in a very like low key, again, accessible music discovery way.
What a great case study, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Love that. Well, let's go over to Charlotte. Frank, what have you guys been doing with this?
Well, we have our small batch concert series, which is named with the idea of the fact that we do it at a brewery in a trendy neighborhood of Charlotte called Noda, north of Davidson. And it's a series that we started quite a while ago before the pandemic, and it caught on. We were very encouraged by it. Then the pandemic came along. We tried doing it virtually for a while, and those were successful from the standpoint of a virtual concert. Once we got back to the in-person working, we had sort of let it go and kept saying we should bring it back, but weren't really sure about the investment and effort and resources. But we went ahead and brought it back this season, and we're just blown away by its success. This is a typical audience for the small batch series. Now, one of the things I like about it is not only that it's a packed room. I think the capacity is about 200, and that's what they've all been this season. Whether it was a solo harpist with a flutist, or whether it was opera singers doing Valentine's Day music, or in the case of this particular small batch concert you're looking at, which is the Charlotte String Collective, an ensemble that focuses on music by Black composers. We get a big crowd who are just really into being together, listening to classical music in this fun, casual venue. And one of the things that gives me a lot of encouragement is looking out at the audience and seeing different people than you normally see at the concert or the opera or the ballet. I've also had the great experience of sort of mingling during the intermission breaks. And every single time I do that, I find somebody who didn't even know about WDAV found this event on a calendar somewhere and decided to come to it. So that shows you how important calendars are. And has now discovered WDAV and an impression of WDAV that's a lot more mainstream, shall we say, than the elite ivory tower of classical music usually is. This has also been a good revenue source for us. In the beginning, it sort of broke even, but it was about gathering people together, and now it's actually generating some good income. We used to technically the concert is free, but we charge for a custom pint glass that has the WDAV logo and the brewery's logo on it. And that was a modest charge. Lately, we've decided to say, pay what you can for the pint glass, and people are making donations that are really surprising to us. One person donated $250 for the 2 pint glasses, So it winds up, and most people get the pint glasses. So as you can see from a crowd like that, you generate a nice bit of change that helps you pay the artists and have a little something for the station.
Nice. Related to this theme of localism as this kind of unique value prop for public radio is an interest in just learning about the local music scene. So this can take the form of people getting to discover new local acts or hearing about the histories and stories of musicians that are part of people's own city or region. And here we're being pretty blunt in saying that there is this opening for you specifically to own the local music scene. We had a montage just kind of recapping from the focus groups this general appetite for local storytelling. Just in the interest of time, we'll skip that with some attitude statements. So this one from the survey elevates this unique service you can offer, quote, a valuable source for discovering new music or emerging artists. Nearly 2/3 of Americans agree with this. And it's especially the case with a lot of specific segments: Gen Xers, Black African Americans, more urban affluent households. On a related theme, we have, further in here. There we go. People having this equally strong appetite for just learning facts and stories about the music or artists that they enjoy. Even more interesting is when we segment by genre interest. So here we're looking at a break specifically with people who say that they're interested in jazz, much more likely to have this appetite for learning facts and stories. We had a similar over index when we looked at classical music listeners too. It just wasn't as large a difference as this cut of jazz versus non-jazz. One final look at the focus group results. We presented a topic that we thought would scratch that itch. This was sort of a documentary content series that presumably dives deep into the music history of people's towns or cities or regions. And the quotes we've curated here are interesting, and that people were inspired to respond to this idea by actually talking about where they're from. So people in Boston brought up kind of an interest in Boston's rock heritage. Someone from North Carolina talked about the story and success of J. Cole. Someone from Kansas City talking about jazz heritage. So that's the kind of feedback that we got from the focus group about people's real interest in their local heritage. And we'll end the point here with kind of independent confirmation of this appetite, this question about whether or not these specific services from a local public radio station would be valuable to people. And then you see what rises to the top across the country has been this service of providing emergency alerts and updates during crises. We saw this all over the country. But in kind of a sneaky third, almost second place, basically, content that highlights local culture, history, artists, and musicians. All right, so with a couple minutes left, our final chapter today has to do with the genre story, where we took a look at the run results for possible ways in which you can evolve your sound and experiment with the kind of music you're curating and airing or covering as part of any kind of local concert series. These are our baseline results on genre interests. It was just a multi-select question. People told us these are the genres they typically enjoy listening to. I feel like this is a nice broad portrait of American tastes. What rises to the top are, classic rock, R&B, country, pop. Classic music has a solid 1 in 4 interest. Jazz enjoyed by about 1 in 5 Americans. What's interesting is when you cross-tab the data by certain segments of the population, again, this generational lens reveals very clearly the ways in which specific genres resonate more or less with younger or older people. So you can see boomers seem to be carrying a lot of that top-line interest in classic rock. Younger generations much more into rap, hip hop, R&B. And when it comes to classical and jazz, really millennials all the way through boomers, it was interesting, seemed to show a pretty similar frequency of interest in those genres. Of course, these interests vary significantly by market. This reminds us how musical taste is very much a local thing. These are all the markets where we did extra oversampling from the Run survey. Look at gospel music, for example. It's sort of, I think it's sixth here. Very much a part of Atlanta's culture, not so much in Colorado, where you see that dark red 11%. But then when you follow Colorado, you see it actually pops for something like EDM with the highest interest for that genre compared to all markets. So this, with the generational story, is just another kind of promo for going into the interactive dashboard and looking for all the different kind of subsegments and communities and how genre interest sort of maps to those. Again, interesting to see how people perceive public radio when it comes to music. So you see here, they already naturally expect you to cover classical, jazz, folk, world music. When you look at metal and EDM, maybe not so much. Soul and R&B in that gray kind of middling area. I'll just say this isn't intended to be an actual red light, green light exercise of what you should and shouldn't cover. Just remember, this is a bit of a reference point for how the general public currently perceives public radio in the music space. To end, this is where we wanted to give some direction for stations who might want to expand and evolve their sound. This is a cluster analysis we did with that question. And you see the outpoint being this 5 cluster solution, which when you look at it kind of closely, it has a lot of face value. You see that people who enjoy jazz are also very likely to enjoy blues and funk. They're sort of there in that 4th cluster together. People who enjoy rap also very likely to enjoy soul and R&B, maybe less related to genres like punk and metal. That top cluster was interesting that has classical in it because it's paired with things that you would expect like world and folk, but it's also paired with things like ambient music or EDM. So when we read that, we assume there's sort of this ethnographic underpinning. So it goes back to that need for background music or tuning out the world. I feel like that's sort of the family resemblance with these genres. A little bit more analysis here. This was to see if classical or jazz interest predicted other audience attributes. Basically what we saw was that, again, you see it mixed alongside things like blues, world, and funk music as being kind of strongly correlated by way of interest. But the story here also is that interest in classical and jazz does not strongly predict other attributes of audience. Notably, what we see here towards the bottom is that the connection with race, specifically people who identify as white or Caucasian, was relatively weak. And that kind of ran counter to what we assume to be the case, that this is a genre that's very much of interest just to old white people. This is just a call out to the study commissioned by Classical King and some other stations about how classical can be leveraged to reach younger and more diverse audiences. And you're seeing that it is very much hitting on that theme, that people of all races and ethnicities listen to classical. It is part of this mix, this broad, diverse musical landscape. Again, we're seeing that people listen to classical, listen to other genres as well. And there's no clean definition of what classical music is. So we're going to close out. I'll throw it back to you, Frank, to tell us a little bit about how Noteworthy is sort of putting this into practice.
Yeah, Noteworthy has been a really big success for us as well, and it's sort of yielded sort of spin-offs. It started off as a feature during the pandemic and the social justice movement, where we wanted to sort of show our listeners of color that they were welcome at our station and that we were allies. And so we created a feature where a couple of times a week we were making a point of playing classical music by a composer of color or a woman composer. And that sort of spun off into a virtual concert series at first because it was during the pandemic. And this is an image of one of the Noteworthy concerts. And the concept with Noteworthy concerts was to bring classical musicians together with local musicians of color. And so these were people like the saxophonist you just saw, who was there with his band, and then the string musicians were from the Charlotte Symphony Orchestra. And all the Noteworthy concerts were a combination of classical musicians and pop musicians of color. And they just got so much enjoyment from it was really encouraging to see them work together. And of course, even though they were virtual concerts, we got a lot of response to it, much more than anything else we'd ever done online. Hundreds and hundreds of people watching the concerts and then watching them again when they were archived. And now the latest noteworthy initiative we've done is a series that we're making available nationally to other stations through PRX, where Loki Karuna, the host of the module, which is 2 minutes long, introduces a different composer each week, and stations are free to use those modules as they see fit. We're very grateful for a handful of stations that have started to do that, and hope that many more will be added.
This is great, Frank. And when we saw that King study 2 years ago, when we were doing the meta-analysis for SRG, we wondered to ourselves, I wonder if anyone out there are putting some of these insights into practice. And there you are, and it seems to be yielding good results. And the Run survey seemed to indicate that there's a lot of openness in the community to the concept of it. So really, another really great case study. We're out of time here in terms of presenting content, but I think we probably have 5 minutes that we can use to tackle questions. And I know that, Sam, you've been monitoring the question box pretty closely. Are there questions that you want to raise up for us to address?
Yes, we have a very active audience here. The one that came up first, which Frank, you did answer, but I do think it's worth bringing to the whole group. To summarize, when some stations have presented themselves as superior to streaming because of the fact that their hosts function as guides, how should they interpret the fact that is presented by a DJ and is presented with commentary are at the bottom of the list of music gratifications?
Yeah, and I think what my response to that is that keep in mind that this is being weighed by musicians, or rather listeners who are listening to other genres of music, where they tend to be more familiar with the artists already and don't need to have someone telling them who they're listening to. Certainly with streaming and places like Spotify, people are coming to it looking for specific artists. With classical music, you have a different dynamic going on. People are discovering the music. And we learned, again, with the research that was done decades ago, that most listeners to a classical music station aren't serious, i.e., knowledgeable listeners, but rather casual listeners who find themselves drawn to the music but don't know a lot about it. And I think, just as the research showed us 20 years ago, they are waiting for those details from an announcer, a human being, who they can connect with, who's not AI generated, who is telling them, hey, did you enjoy that? Well, that was music by Beethoven and it was played by Claudio Arrau or whoever, So I think that's what distinguishes the classical music response.
Yeah. Lindsay, what does it look like on the AAA side?
Yeah, I think two things are key. One, I think delivery is important. I think you need hosts that are going to talk to you like you're just hanging out with them, and it needs to be very friendly, like you're friends, and almost like they know. We have a lot of feedback that our listeners are like, I feel like I know your hosts, although I've never met them, that kind of thing. So it's like, oh, like a casual, friendly delivery that's like conversational. I think that is really important. I think the other thing, and this is something that radio does so well, that I think is also really hard to hone for many hosts. It takes time, but really strong storytelling is really effective. And really strong breaks require, if you have hosts who can tell a story, but tell it like they're just sitting right next to you, anyone's going to find that immensely captivating. I always tell my hosts, I don't care how long your break is, as long as it's compelling. 15 seconds, a minute, 15 seconds. It just has to be compelling, because you don't really pay attention to time when it's compelling. So I think that that piece is really key, because that's what's hard about that question, is because a lot of radio chatter is really meaningless when you listen to other stations. And I think it's hard to take out a lot from that without parsing out, well, what are they saying? And a lot of times it's nothing. But I think when your host has something to say and they're giving you something compelling, then it is going to be worth it.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam, any other questions that are rising to the top for you?
Yes, we had one that had a couple of upvotes. How do these findings, and this is kind of generally throughout the survey, differ when the audience is split out by preferences for genre, specifically the classical, the AAA, and the jazz folks? What are their priorities compared to those of the general population as a whole?
So this is a really nice segue because we're out of time to a non-answer, well, a quasi-answer to that question. This is what the dashboard exists for. You will have the ability to choose your own adventure, go into the dashboard and look at those folks who have chosen those musical preferences and see what their profile is and what else they think about other issues in the study. If you don't already have access to the interactive dashboard, just shoot an email request to this address on the screen and Sam will hook you up. And I see Joyce and Abby back on the screen, which is our sign that we need to go away.
Yeah, just a footnote on the dashboard. If you missed the 101, that is where the how-to happened, where Sam demonstrated how to use the dashboard, as did Craig from NPR. So make sure when you get your access, you also grab that recording on the Greater Public website so you can follow along.
Also,
All
we
right.
should remind you about Wednesday's workshop. If we have room, we encourage you to go to Greater Public's website and register to join us on Wednesday. We're going to dig a little more deeply into this topic, so we hope to see you then.
Yep. Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you, especially Frank and Lindsay, for the great examples and the great work you're doing. Very inspiring and uplifting. So thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.